Okay, so Shavua Tov, everyone. After 9 weeks of Shimshon, feel a bit sad really leaving him behind. I would like to know if any of you yesterday here's Vivian, let's let Vivian in. I'm Paul, okay. If any of you yesterday were following either in shul or at home the Haftorah, I hope that you recognized it. Leon was in shul yesterday and tried to catch my eye whilst he was reading the Haftarah. Of course, the Haftarah yesterday was the story that we went through a couple of months ago of Yiftach, of the judge who was a Ben Zonah and who had been made into the judge because he was a good soldier, and then made the mistake of making a very foolish vow and ending up either sacrificing his daughter literally or making her go off into the mountains and be a hermit. So that was yesterday's Haftarah. So I hope you all recognized that when you were reading it. But we've left that behind now, and we are coming to the end of Sefer Shoftim. There are 2 more stories basically left in Sefer Shoftim. What we don't see in these 2 stories, and we don't see it deliberately and very pointedly, is we don't see any shofet, we don't see any judge. All we see are stories of anarchy, dreadful behaviour, murder, rape, idol worship, and that's just in the first couple of chapters that we're going to read now. It's even Paul Westbrook is going to find it difficult to find anything good to say about the Jewish people or the Bnei Israel, to correctly call them, in these next 2 stories. They are stories of total really anarchy and bad behavior, and really as far away as you could possibly get from being the Am HaNivchar, the chosen people, and being a light unto the nations. So you could first of all ask, before we even get into these stories, what are they doing there? Why are we being subject to these stories which are clearly not there to show us how to behave? They're there to show us how not to behave. And I think one of the interesting things about this is that unlike many other historical events, we don't just show the good things. We've said this many times before. We show our bad points, and sadly throughout our history we have behaved rather badly on many occasions. We do show our bad points, warts and all, Oliver Cromwell, as we've said many times before. And I think that's to our credit, and to the Chazal's credit, and to the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, who decided which books went in the canon and which books didn't go in the canon. It would be very easy for them to have censored these terrible stories that we're going to read out, but they didn't. And they're there, obviously, for us to see what happened and to learn from them. But I'm warning you, it comes with a health warning these next few weeks. It's not pretty reading at all. So there are lots of things that we can learn from it and bring out of it, and hopefully we'll do that as we go along. So I don't expect that we'll spend as long as we did with the Shimshon story, because, well, after all, Cecil B. DeMille has not made a film on this, although he should really. I think it would have made a great film, these last few chapters. It would have had to have been X-rated, but it would have made good cinema, I think. So let's go to chapter 17. Let me share the screen with you for those that don't have a Tanakh in front of you. Where have you gone? There you are, I think. Right, can you all see the screen? Give me a thumbs up. Yes, good, okay. So, let's go from the top. Where's Leon? I can't see Leon. There you are, right.
I'm
Leon,
here.
good morning.
But I'm having a bit of a problem with the sound and joining. I've joined eventually. Anyway,
Well,
we'll see what.
We can hear you fine.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can I have a thumbs up if you can hear Leon, please? Yes, we can all hear you, Leon.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So off we go.
You want me to start at chapter 17?
Chapter 17.
There was a man from Mount Ephraim whose name was Michah. He said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, and you cursed whoever stole it, and even said the curse in my ears, behold, the money is with me, I took it. His mother said, blessed be my son to Hashem. He returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, but his mother said, I had resolved to consecrate the money from Hashem from my hand, for Hashem, from my hand, to my son, to make a carved image and a molten image. So now I will give it back to you.
Okay, so there's the beginning of our story, which begins strangely in the middle of the story, really. There's this chap here called Michah, who is later referred to as Micah. This is quite common in Tanakh, that a person has a long name and a short name. We have Eliyahu, and he's sometimes referred to as Eliah. And here is Michah and Michayahu, Yeshayahu. Michah and Michayahu are the same person. Now, he lives in Har Ephraim. Where's Har Ephraim? I'll show you where Har Ephraim is. There's Har Ephraim. Can you see the map? Yeah? Yeah, you can see the map. Okay, I'm just going to make it a bit bigger. There we go. So you can see where Jaffa is there. This is the portion of Dan, and that will become important later on, either today or next week. So it's important that you know where the biblical territory of Dan is. It's over there. And Ephraim is next to Dan. And Har Ephraim, or the mountains of Ephraim, over here. In this area over here. So that is where he lived. It's important that we know that this was close to the territory of Dan. Let's go back and see what happened. So his mother said to him, he said to his mother, remember those 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you? Now that is a lot of money. How do we know that's a lot of money? You will see later on in this story, you'll see that somebody is offered a job and his salary is 10 pieces of silver a year. Now, the 1,100 pieces of silver, can anybody remember where 1,100 pieces of silver was mentioned previously? Yes, Hilary.
Shimshon, she was offered 1,100 pieces of silver to report to the Philistines on
correct. Shimshon. She was offered 5 lots of 1,100 pieces of silver, if you remember. Each one of the 5 officers of Philistine offered her 1,100 pieces of silver to dob in Shimshon. So the 1,100 pieces of silver seems to be a recurring theme here. Later on, we'll see, remember I worked it out last week, that that was the equivalent of something like 50 million shekels. So 1,100 pieces of silver is a lot of money. Later on, you'll see that this chap is offered a salary of 10 pieces of silver a year. So it's 110 times the annual salary of this fellow, a lot of money. Somebody had stolen it, and this woman cursed the person who stole it. And the son, Michah, has obviously had a bit of charota and come back and said, it was me, I took it. And his mother said, oh, well, never mind, Michah, you should be blessed. I was going to dedicate this money to Hashem. And how is she going to dedicate this money to Hashem? It's a perverse and twisted sort of thing. She takes this money, she gets the money back from her son, and she says, I've dedicated the silver before Hashem from my hand to my son. I'm giving it to my son to make a graven image and a molten one. Now, I'm sure that you will remember, and I'd be surprised if the mother of Michah did not remember, that the 10 Commandments include, very early on, a prohibition against graven images and molten images. It's number 2. Don't make graven images. Don't do it. So she is dedicating this money to Hashem, and at the same time transgressing one of the most basic fundamental laws, fundamental principles of the religion by making a graven image. And she's dedicating this to Hashem. There's an irony here that she doesn't even seem to appreciate. I remember Leon's got locked out. Here he is back again. I remember when I was a teenager, I went and spent some time on a kibbutz before I went to university, and it was a religious kibbutz. And I had a first cousin. No, not first cousin. What am I talking about? I had a second cousin. I had a second cousin who was at the same age as me, and he had gone to a non-religious kibbutz during this same time. And I remember meeting him at a mutual great aunt's flat. Jeffrey will remember Auntie Becky's flat. This cousin of mine, we met up on at my aunt's flat, and we were talking about how we had celebrated Purim. And I was telling him that the Purim on my kibbutz was a very lively affair, and was plenty of alcohol going on. And he told me that on his kibbutz, they had a disco on Friday night to celebrate Purim. And being a rather young and rather black and white and naive fellow, I could not get my head round this. I could not get my head round how you could celebrate a Jewish festival by desecrating another one. It just didn't make any sense to me at all. And no matter how much he tried to explain to me that this was not a religious kibbutz, and I said, well, if it's not a religious kibbutz, what are they celebrating Purim for? And if they're going to celebrate Purim, why do they, do something which is breaking Shabbat? It didn't make any sense to me at all. But it obviously made great sense to them, because for them, Purim was not necessarily a religious festival. It was a festival of the nation, and Shabbat was not of importance to them. And this is the same thing that's going on here to a certain degree. Mrs. Michah, Michah's mum, is wanting to celebrate and dedicate something of great value to Hashem. And by doing it, she is breaking a most fundamental concept of not having a graven image. And you'll see as we go through this story that this is a recurring theme, that this doesn't seem to bother anybody. From our perspective, we understand that the whole concept of avodah zarah, of idol worship, is completely anathema to the Jewish religion. But it seems at this time, this was not the case. Now, I just want to, since I just mentioned the word time, it's reminded me to say something which I wanted to say right at the beginning, and that is that this is coming at the end of Sefer Shoftim. But all the commentators seem to be agreed that it is not in chronological order. Most of the commentators seem to say that it was very early on in the era of the judges, not long after the death of Yehoshua. And others say that it was a bit later than that, but none of them say that it actually happened where it lies in the book of Shoftim, in other words, after the story of Shimshon. Shimshon was the last judge. These stories that we're going to read for the next few chapters, which finishes Sefer Shoftim, took place prior to Shimshon. So the question, the obvious question is, why did the author, said to be Shmuel, the Navi, the prophet Shmuel, why did he take these stories out of context and put them here after Shimshon as the end of Sefer Shoftim? And what most people seem to pull out from this thing is that it is designed to show us the degradation of the people, how they started off at the beginning of Sefer Shoftim with Yehoshua, with the task to conquer the land, to go into their tribal territories. And as we'll see later on in this story, the tribe of Dan failed miserably in their conquering of their territories and had to go off and find somebody else's to steal. And the fact that we started off at the end of Yehoshua with great, what's the word I'm looking for? Great promise and potential, it deteriorates and degenerates into this dreadful situation of Shimshon's behavior, the whole people, how the people behaved around Shimshon, and this is even worse than that. And so therefore the author puts it at the end of the book to keep the narrative flowing, if you like, of a downward trajectory of the level of the people. And it seems that the turning point seems to be the story of Gidon. Remember the story of Gidon, who was fiery about the fact that Hashem had almost like abandoned them. He was one that said when somebody said to him, Hashem be with you, and he said, what are you talking about, Hashem be with you? Hashem's not with us. We're subjugated. And then he took on the mantle and he battled against the local peoples. But then at the end of it, what did he do? He made an ephod, and you'll see, we're going to see this ephod, this idol thing, is going to rear its ugly head again here. And the overall picture of Sefer Shoftim from the point of Gidon's making that ephod is all downhill. We then see Yiftach, we then see all those other sort of non-entity judges. Then we see Shimshon and all the things that we discussed about over the last couple of months. And now we're going to see proper idol worship, rape, pillage, stealing, everything that is awful. And so the author, Shmuel, has put these stories, which took place at an earlier age, at an earlier time during this period of time, and he's put them at the end to show us sort of thematically that the level of the people has dropped to such a level. Remember, we found at the beginning of the Shimshon story, they didn't cry out to God anymore. They were beyond that. Now, not only are they not crying out to God, they're serving God, in inverted commas, by breaking just about everything that they can possibly break. And it shows the level of the depths to which they had sunk. And that is why Shmuel Hanavi placed these stories where they are. So I meant to give that as an intro, but I forgot. So there we go. So,
Johnny.
Yes, Johnny. Yes.
Wasn't she making this idol for our gods? She wasn't. The other nations had idols, they were worshipping the idols. She's having this idol.
Yeah, and that's the irony of it. That's right, Johnny. That's the irony of it, that she thought she was serving God. The parallel here is the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf. If you remember the story of the golden calf, Moshe goes up to heaven. He's a day late coming back according to their calculations, and they say, Moshe's disappeared. We need something else. And what do? They build themselves a molten image, a graven image, a golden calf, and we know how that ended. That was not something which pleased Hashem. So yes, the irony here is that Mrs. Michah is, in her mind, is serving God. Now, this is something which I think that is a powerful message to us. How many people do we know, and maybe it's us ourselves, maybe it's me, maybe it's you, how many people serve Hashem honestly and truly and think that they are serving Hashem in the correct way and are actually doing completely the opposite? I'll give you an example, a story which you'll smile at, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. We all know that there is a mitzvah to have a beautiful etrog. Okay, pre-Eitz Hadar, you're meant to take a beautiful etrog. Helen's smiling because she's heard this story from me before, but I'm going to say it anyway. Two people go into a shop to buy an etrog shop. Two very holy Jews, and they see at the front of the shop there in a beautiful display case the most magnificent etrog, and they say to themselves, I am going to buy that etrog. I am going to fulfill this mitzvah of having the best possible etrog. I'm going to spare no expense. I am going to buy this etrog because Hashem has said we must have a beautiful etrog, and I am going to have a beautiful etrog, and I am going to serve Hashem with all my heart. The problem is that the guy that entered the shop with him, who's not with him but came in at the same time, has exactly the same thought process. He's also going to serve Hashem to the greatest possible way and buy this beautiful etrog. And so they start to go towards the etrog. And each one sees that the other one's going towards the etrog. So says, I've got to get there first. I want to be the one to get the most beautiful etrog for Hashem. So the first one trips up the second one, stamps on his head on the way. The other guy gets up, kicks the other one in the backside, and they have a big fight. One of them gets stabbed and killed. And the first one gets there and he buys the beautiful etrog, and he's served Hashem beautifully by buying the beautiful etrog. On the way, he's happened to kill another Jew. But that doesn't matter because he's bought himself a beautiful etrog. And it's an extreme story. But it happens. People think that they are serving Hashem in the most greatest possible way. And on the way, they are abusing other very important ways of keeping a religion, whether it be ben Adam lamakom bein, or whether it be ben Adam lachaver, or maybe be between man and God or man and his fellow. You see this very often, and I have seen it sadly many, many times. People who really, really believe that they are doing the right thing, and yet to other people it's very obvious that they are fundamentally flawed and breaking just about everything that you can possibly think of. And there are thousands of examples. You can think of your own examples. And this is what is happening here in Pesel Michah. This is what is happening here with Mrs. Michah. And nobody bats an eyelid. This is what you'll see in this story. Nobody bats an eyelid. This seems to be completely acceptable behavior, to go and make a graven image. So that's what's going on here. It just at the beginning of the story, we can see how twisted and perverted the practice of the religion was. Johnny Halpin is absolutely right. This was not idol worship in the way we've had before, where the people took an idol of Baal or Dagon or somebody else's god and worshipped it. That was something different. This is our God, but at the same time, we are breaking just about anything that they can possibly break. Yes, Howard.
Molten add, Johnny. Once you take the heat away, it's no longer molten. It's just graven. You can't keep the heat going. So what does molten add?
That's how it was made. I mean, the method of making, you can either burn, not burn, you can either heat it all up so it's liquid and then make it into something, or you can chisel it away.
Oh, I see.
Okay. A graven image will be a chiseled one.
I see.
A molten image would be you heat up the gold, you make it all runny, and then you put it in a mold.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Two types of idol, if you like.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got the who wants to say something here before we carry on? I can't see who it is.
It's Sharon.
Okay.
Because it seems to me that a graven image could be made of wood or could be made of soft clay. That molten means it's metal and therefore a more expensive commodity. This would be a sort of a top of the line sort of idol. That's how I read it, as opposed to clay or wood.
Could be, but you could also, it could be, but you could also engrave the gold. You're right, though. I think that's possibly a distinction. But either way, it's two things which are not allowed, graven and molten. So let's carry on. So verse 4, Leon. We can't hear you, Leon. Unmute.
He again returned the money to his mother. So his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith. And he made it into a carved image and a molten image. And it remained in Micah's house. The man Micah had a house of idolatry. He made an ephod and icons, and he installed one of his sons to be his priest.
Okay, let's stop there. Okay, so now...
Why did he make an ephod? I thought ephod was a vest.
It is a vest, yes. It's a good question. I'm going to answer that right now, Dave. If you remember, that's what Gideon did. The ephod is a vest, you're right. It's like a breastplate kind of thing that was a fancy thing, which in the Bet HaMikdash, the Kohanim wore. It's part of the service of God. The problem was that this guy was not a Kohen, and his house was not the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. And let's just look at the words in Hebrew here. So first of all, she gave 200 pieces of silver. That's a lot of money to make this thing. And they made the graven image, and it was there. Now, verse 5. The man Michah had, how did you translate that, Leon, please?
Had a house of idolatry.
Okay, that's how it says it, translates it here on my screen, if you can see it over here. I'm just interested now to see how Rav Steinsaltz translates it, because he translates it differently, I would imagine, because I think there's a different explanation. He translates it as follows. As the man Michah now had an important, probably rare idol, he established a shrine in its name, and he made an ephod, an apron or short coat worn primarily by priests. And he made, you translated that as icons, Leon, Trafim. He doesn't translate the word Trafim, and over here you'll see neither does the Chabad translation. Trafim, will come back to it. Steinsaltz says possibly statuettes in human form. And since Michah was not a young man and had adult sons of his own, he installed one of his sons who became a priest for him. Now, there's all sorts in that verse. We've got to go very, very carefully on this verse. He had a house, look at the Hebrew, Va'ish Michah lo Beit Elohim. Beit Elohim, a house of God. Now, Art Scroll and Chabad have translated that as a house of idolatry. If you take what we've just...
Is it a house of gods?
And not necessarily, Dave, because we know that God with a capital G is also referred to as Elohim. So yes, Elohim is plural. And if you are going to translate it as, if you want to understand the meaning of it as a house of idolatry, then you could definitely say house of gods. However, what I'm going to say is that there is another way you could understand this, given what we've just been speaking about for the last few minutes. And that is that Michah made for himself a Beit Elokim as opposed to Beit Elohim. Now, why did I use the kuf instead of the hey? Because I'm suggesting that possibly, I'm not saying that these two things are mutually exclusive, but possibly what Michah was doing was really what his mother had intended. His mother had intended to have to do something very positive for Hashem. If you go back to the verse where it talks about it, she says, I had dedicated Hikdashti et HaKesef LaHashem. Now look over here, verse 3. That is Hashem's name. There's no doubt there. That is Yud Kei Vav Kei. There's no doubt there in that her intention was to serve God with a capital G, our God. It says so there. Hikdashti et HaKesef la Yud Kei Vav Kei. So what I'm suggesting to you is possibly that when we come down to verse 5, where my pointer is now, even though it says Beit Elohim, which could be, as Dave suggests, the house of gods, and could be a house of idolatry as translated by Art Scroll and Chabad, it could be also that and I would put my own view is that it's more likely to be, because this is what his mother intended, that he had set up in his own mind a house of Hashem, and he thought that he was doing the right thing. And this brings us back to the same theme that I was talking about earlier on, which is that there is sadly a situation where misguided people really believe that they are serving Hashem, but actually are doing things all wrong. So house of idolatry, maybe house of God. Either way, he made an ephod. He made this vest, this priestly garment. It's the same word that Gideon made, if you remember back in the Gideon story, and as I said earlier on, that was, if you like, the turning point where everything all started to go wrong, because they started to worship this thing, this ephod, as opposed to the concept of Hashem. And he also made teraphim, which was translated by Leon as icons. Chabad call it teraphim, don't translate it. And Rav Steinsaltz uses the word teraphim as well, but then goes on to say possibly statuettes in human form. Yes, Paul.
My translation says household idols and compares it to the household idols that Rachel stole from her father. Okay,
you stole my thunder there.
I'm sorry.
That was good. I knew somebody would. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm glad that you're ahead of me. So yes, Paul correctly points out that the word teraphim is somewhere in the Torah, and I can see that David Marks is with us. David, where will we find the word teraphim, please? David Marks, are you with us? Unmute yourself. No, he's not there. Well, it's, as Paul has pointed out, it's in the story of Rachel, when when Yaakov ran away from Lavan. He had took his children, took his children and his animals and everything, and off he went after serving in Lavan's house for 20 years. And Rachel, his daughter Rachel, Lavan's daughter Rachel, married to Yaakov, took the teraphim, the household idols of Lavan, and she hid them in the saddlebags of her camel. David's unmuted himself. David, where is it, please?
Vayetze.
Thank you very much. Parashat Vayetze in Sefer Bereshit. She took the teraphim and she hid them in the saddlebags. Lavan comes along and accuses Yaakov of stealing his idols, stealing his gods. And Yaakov said, nonsense, I've not taken anything of yours. And whoever has taken these things should die. Go on, find them then. If you think we've nicked them, find them. So Lavan goes searching all around, can't find them. Rachel says, excuse me, father, that I don't get off my camel to honor you, but you know, it's that time of the month, so I can't. And therefore he's not able to go searching in the saddlebag that she's sat on, and therefore she manages to get these things away. Now, there are various maforshim as to why she would have stolen these things. The Paul Westbrook version of it will be that she stole them in order to prevent Lavan from committing idolatry. Correct, Paul? Yes. That's poor. The Lieberman version is that she took them because she wanted them for herself, and actually because she'd been brought up in the house of Lavan, she hadn't fully yet been able to divest herself of idolatry, and she wanted them for herself. So you pays your money and you takes your choice. But that is the word terafim, which is repeated here. Sharon, are you wanting to say something?
No, it's been discussed.
Okay, fine. So this fellow Michah, I would like to suggest that Michah has set up a Beis HaMedrash, a yeshiva, a shul, a Beis HaMikdash, whatever you want to call it, in the name of Hashem. But because the way they did it in those days was so twisted, that he's now got local idols of Trafim. He's made himself an ephod, and he's going further now. What he then does was Vayemale et yad echad mibanav vayehi lo lechohen. Now, Michah has made his son into the priest, into the Kohen. There is one thing that a Kohen, a true Kohen, has to be, and that is what?
The son of a Kohen.
He has to be the son of a Kohen, and he has to be from the tribe of Levi, obviously.
Okay.
Now, this Michah fellow was from where? Well, we know where he was from, don't we? Because he was from living in Har Ephraim. So he was around here. He was not from the tribe of Levi. We're not actually told which tribe he's from, but we will see from the story later on, it is obvious that he is not from the tribe of Levi, and therefore his son is not a Kohen and is not a Levi. But nevertheless, he makes him into a Kohen. Another example of the twisted behavior of Michah and everybody around him in the service of God. And as Johnny pointed out, I think it was Johnny that pointed out, this is very different to the idol worship of other nations. This is idol worship of our own God. So he's twisted that and he's made his son into a Kohen. He's not very happy about it, by the way, as you will see shortly, but it's the best he can do because he's got nobody else to do the job to make him into a Kohen. So now we have a verse coming up now, verse 6, which really should have been verse 1. And I don't really understand why it is not verse 1 and why it is in verse 6. Because what this verse tells us is the causation, no, not the causation, the original reason why all these things happened in the first place. Verse 6, Leon.
In those days, there was no king in Israel. A man would do whatever seemed proper in his eyes.
Okay, now that is a very important verse. There was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his eyes. That is a reasonable dictionary description, Michael Leaf, I would suggest, of the word anarchy. Everybody doing that which is right in his eyes. Nachum, are you just waving at me, or do you want to say something? If you want to say something, unmute. We can't hear you. We still can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted. He can't unmute, and I can't unmute you either because it won't allow me anymore. Okay, try and work it out how to unmute yourself, and then we'll carry on. Meanwhile, yes, so there's no king in Israel. Every man is doing that which is upright in his eyes. Now,
Can you turn it
okay, I see it. I see it.
Okay,
I see it.
Nachum, go on.
Okay, so where is the Torah during this entire fiasco? Who's studying the Torah?
Okay.
Where's the source of Torah in this matter?
You know which one?
Good question. And the answer is, I can tell you where it isn't. It isn't in Har Ephraim. It's in Shiloh, where the Mishkan is. There is a copy of the Torah there. But it seems, and this is exactly what thank you for the intro, because this is exactly what I was going to talk about now. It seems that the Mishkan in Shiloh was being neglected. Now, David Marks, please unmute yourself, because I'm going to ask you another question now. We see this expression here, Ish hayashar ba'einav ya'aseh. Every man was doing that which was upright in his own eyes. Where do we find that in the Torah, please? Any? Oh, I think I've got him, everyone. I think I've got him.
Sunday morning.
Okay. Oh, this is an achievement. Okay, it's in Parshat Re'eh. It's in chapter 12 of Deuteronomy of Dvarim, verse 8. It's talking about when the people will come into the land of Israel, and they will be sovereign in that land after the conquest of Joshua. Verse 8 says like this: Lo ta'asun k'chol asher anachnu osim po hayom. Don't do that which you are doing today here. Ish kol hayashar ba'einav. Every third body doing that which is upright in his own eyes. Ki lo batem ad ata el hamnucha vel hanachala asher Hashem lekechem notzon. You haven't yet arrived at the place that I'm going to give you. Va'avartem et hayarden, and you're going to cross the Jordan. V'shavtem ba'aretz, and you're going to live in the land. Which Hashem's going to give you. You're going to beat your enemies. The place which Hashem will choose to place His name and His Shekhinah there. Shama taviu eit kol asher anochi mitzavetchem. There you will bring that which I command you to bring. Your offerings, your sacrifices, masrechem, your tithes, trumat yedchem, your gifts, v'chol mivchan nidrechem, and anything that you want to donate, asher tidaru l'Hashem, which you will donate to Hashem. Very clearly in Sefer Dvarim, it says, do not do whatever is good for you and make your own temples. But when you come into the land, there will be one place. There will be a central place. It will be the Mishkan, which at the moment is in Shiloh. Later on, it's going to be the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. And that is the place that you are going to bring your donations to. So if you're going to make something beautiful for Hashem, a beautiful menorah, a beautiful picture, whatever it is, that's where it goes. Don't make your own Beit HaMikdash. And it uses that expression, Asher Yashar Ba'inav. Everybody should not do that which is fitting for themselves. And this verse in our chapter here directly points us to Dvarim, because here they are doing absolutely the opposite of what they were told to do. And that's why it says there was no king in Israel. Who was the king in Israel when that verse was said in Dvarim? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the king in Israel, in inverted commas. And then he says to you, don't do that which is fitting in your own eyes. Do what I'm telling you now. And that is, there's a central place where you serve Hashem. You don't do it the way you think it's fitting. It's got to be done the correct way. And the fact that this verse says, Ish hayashar ba'einav ya'aseh, anyone who did whatever they wanted to do, is telling us very clearly that they were transgressing the direct commandment of Moshe Rabbeinu back in Dvarim. And that's why this is such an important verse. If anybody has any suggestions as to why it is plonked in verse 6, instead of being verse 1, where we read about the beginning of the story, I would be very interested to hear, because I cannot think of a good reason why it's not verse 1. Sharon, are you going to enlighten us?
No, I'm going to add a question, because I have no light on this. I'm not a scholar. Doesn't Ish HaYashar, Yashar, I always thought means straight or forward. So I don't understand Ish HaYashar. What does that mean? Or does that just mean he went directly toward or straight ahead to his own eyes instead of following anybody else's?
It's the same root of the word. You're right, Yashar. Okay. If you're giving somebody directions and you say Yashar, Yashar, you mean go straight ahead. But it also means upright. It means upright in the moral sense, correct. And Ish Yashar is an upright man. If you say somebody is an Ish Yashar, that means he's an upright, moral, well-behaved person. It's the same root. Of course, he's going on a straight path. You can say somebody's a crooked man. If you say somebody's a crooked man, we all know what that means. He's crooked. If you say somebody's straight as a die, then that means he's upright, he's correct, and he's moral. So it's the same root of the word. Yes, Johnny. Unmute, Johnny, unmute.
I can't answer your question why it's here, not at the beginning. But two things. The silver, there were 1,100 pieces of silver, which you said, I will dedicate to God. And when she got the money back, first of all, she only gave 200 to her son. Number one. And number two, there's no king, but what did the judges do in this time? Okay. What were they doing?
Yeah, well, they weren't doing anything. That's the point.
No.
Yeah, so when it says there was no king, it means there was no central authority.
Yeah,
and there was no local authority either. That's the whole point. So yeah, let me answer the first question. Out of the 1,100, she took 200 and gave it to the silversmith to make the thing. And presumably the other 900 went for running expenses, to pay the priest and to buy the carbonus or whatever else they did this thing. So she dedicated the 1,100, but it was a 200 capital expense and 900 for running expenses. Okay, well, nobody can help me out on why verse 6 isn't verse 1. Oh, Leon, yes?
Well, I just wanted to point out that your view as to it should have been in verse 1. This actual verse is in brackets in the art scroll. So it's put in the wrong place, so to speak.
That's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. How do art scroll go and find a verse in Tanakh and put brackets around it? I'd be very interested to know why they did that, and maybe it's exactly that reason. Maybe they also are struggling with it being there, and maybe that's an indication that they also think it should be verse 1. Anyway, yes, Michael. We can't hear you.
Sorry. To me, it's actually perfectly logical that it's here and not at the beginning in verse 1, because until verse 5, nothing really had been done that was against halakha or against the way of doing things.
What? Until now? What about making a graven image?
Well, this is it. That's what, verse 4. Sorry, till verse 4.
Okay, so then in that case, it should have been at verse, well, I think verse 3 is problematic, because she says, I'm going to make a graven image. So maybe it should be verse 3 then, not verse 1. It could be verse 3. But verses 3, 4, and 5 are definitely out the window.
All right.
So yeah, I'll accept that it should be verse 3.
Okay, done.
Yes, Howard.
Well, I think it's confirmatory of what we've seen so far, and it's about to introduce this lad. He's not a bachor, he's younger than a bachor, he's a stripling. And I think it's giving him license to behave any way he likes.
Okay.
He's below the age of responsibility, I suggest, being a Nahar, not a bachor.
Okay, we are going to introduce another aspect here, which we will go on to. And I suppose if you like, verse 6 points upwards to verses 3, 4, and 5, and downwards beyond. But anyway, it just struck me as being interesting that it was in that particular position. It's not where I would have put it, and I'm sure it's not where our famous author, Philip Lehrer, would have put it in his book. He would have had it in verse 1, I'm sure. Right, let's go on. Verse 7, let's see what happens now.
There was a lad from Bethlehem of Judah, of the family of Judah. He was a Levite, but he lived there.
Okay, stop there, Leon. Let's just do that one verse. That's a bit of a paradoxical verse, isn't it? A lad from Bethlehem in Judah, from the family of Judah, and he was a Levite. How does that work? If he was a Levite, then he was from the tribe of Levi. If he was a family of Judah, then he wasn't a Levi. So what's going on in this verse, please? Okay, he lived in Bethlehem, which is in the territory of Judah, fine. But he's from the family of Judah, and yet he's a Levi. How does that work? Any offers?
His mother.
Yes, Paul, very good. His mother. Yes, I think that's what Steinsaltz says. His mother was from the tribe of Judah, and his father was from the tribe of Levi. And he sojourns there. Very interesting word here. Who
it could play for Judah, Johnny. If he's a good footballer, he could play for either Judah or Levi.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's on his mother's side. He could play.
That's what they do it now. That's what they do now.
Yeah. And yeah, he could be. But there's an interesting word here. Who gar sham? He sojourned there. Now we know the word gar. There is a word, a common word in Hebrew, which we will all know. The word ger. What does the word ger mean? Ger is a stranger. A stranger. So when there are various different words in biblical Hebrew for living in a place. Vayeshev, Yaakov, and Yaakov settled. Vayeshev means lashevet means to settle in a place, to sit. Lashevet means to sit. It means to be settled. Lagur means to go to a place and to be a stranger. The English translation, which is here actually on my page here, is sojourn. That's not a very commonly used word in colloquial English, to sojourn somewhere, but in literary English, sojourn means to be there on a temporary basis. So let's have a look there what Steinsaltz says. Steinsaltz says, and he lived there in Bethlehem, despite the fact that this was not one of the Levite cities. And so Steinsaltz is telling us that he was a ger here, not a ger as in a convert, but he was ger as in a stranger. He was wandering, sojourning. Lagur means to wander. We have that word in Sedonites when we read about Yaakov going down to Egypt, Lagur Sham, to sojourn there. They didn't go, at least initially, they didn't go Lashevet, to dwell there, to sit there in the land and to be a permanent presence there. So Lagur, the word gur or ger or gar, all this root of this word implies an element of not belonging. And you'll see that this fellow, this Levi, he demonstrates the whole of his life a lack of commitment to anything and to anybody, and a lack of belonging. He is a hired hand. You'll see as we go on in the story that he is available for the highest bidder, and he's there in Bethlehem, wandering around. He's not got a place to properly stay, and that's where he was. And so then he was in Bethlehem, and presumably he couldn't find a job. So verse 8, Leon.
The man went from the city, from Bethlehem of Judah, to sojourn where he would find it suitable.
Okay, now let's just stop there halfway in the pasuk, because let's look at the Hebrew words. He went out of Bethlehem, Yehuda. Lagur, again, that word lagur, to sojourn, let's call it that. Ba'asher yimtza, wherever he will find. Wherever he will find what? Doesn't tell us. Ba'asher yimtza. You'd expect him to say Ba'asher yimtza tafkid, wherever he could find a role. Ba'asher yimtza ishto, wherever he would find his wife. Wherever he would find what? And I think this gives us the idea that he is a wandering Jew. He doesn't know what he's looking for. He knows he's looking for something, but he doesn't know what he's looking for. And we'll see by his behavior later on that his whole life actually is one long looking for something and not actually finding it. And I think this is a beautiful literary technique here of leaving a sentence hanging in the air. He's going to lagur ba'asher yimtza. He'll sojourn wherever he will find. Question mark. Yes, Sharon.
I think it's lovely that when we first meet him, he's a na'ar. He's a young man. And later on, he's called an ish. But he's obviously on the journey of a young man. He's obviously a person who is trying to cross some boundaries in order to find himself. I have no idea where this story is going, but just that juxtaposition of a journey of coming of age in a lawless, unstructured environment is, I think, beautifully set up here by the change in the language.
Okay, thank you for that. It's a nice idea that Howard also mentioned earlier on, that he is described initially in verse 7 as a na'ar. A na'ar is a young lad. And as Sharon has pointed out, in verse 8, he's now described as an ish. So he was a na'ar in Bethlehem. One wonders what happened to him in Bethlehem to change him from a na'ar to an ish. But perhaps that's not for a family book. Anyway.
I think the journey itself is what a person goes through in that liminal period between being a youth and being an adult.
I think you're right, but I would have loved it had he not been described as an ish until a bit later on, when he has gone through a few more experiences. So I'm just wondering what turned him from a na'ar to an ish. We're not told. If he'd been described for the first time as an ish later on in the story, then it would fit your theory even better. Yes, Howard.
And well, I'm agreeing with Sharon. It goes from na'ar to ish without going through bechor.
Yeah. So one wonders.
Fascinating.
One wonders what he got up to. That Shmuel Hanavi is not telling us. Anyway.
Yeah.
So,
why hasn't he got a name, Johnny? Why haven't he got a name?
Why hasn't he got? You'll see his name later on.
Oh.
It's one of those. Again, it's a literary technique which builds up the excitement. It's a bit like a whodunit. You'll find his name, but only towards the end of the story. So if you don't want to have it spoilt, don't read on. Okay. But we will find out his name later on. Let's finish off the verse, Leon. Verse 8.
He came to Mount Ephraim, up to the house of Michah, to make his way.
Yeah, and in my translation on the page says, while continuing to make his way. So it's like this house of Michah. It seems like it's some kind of stopping off place. Rav Steinsaltz translates it nicely. He says, the man went from the city from Bethlehem of Judah to reside wherever he would find. Apparently, he could not find a job or residence in Bethlehem. And as a Levite, he was not particularly attached to the city. Therefore, he wandered north, and he came to the highlands of Ephraim, to the house of Michah, to make his way onward. He came to Michah's shrine to spend the night there, or in order to meet people and find a livelihood. So it seems from this that the house of Michah is some kind of Chabad house. Now, I don't mean, before anybody jumps on me, I don't mean to necessarily suggest that a Chabad house is a house of idol worship. Please don't jump on me for that. But this is some kind of Chabad house here where people could stop off on their journeys, presumably be refreshed, presumably be given a place to stay, food and lodgings, and no doubt at the same time be given some religious instruction, since this is a house of God. It is a Beit Elohim, as we've been told. So I think that the way Rav Steinsaltz translates it, it gives us a nice picture of this young man who's no longer a now, but he's still probably a young man, and he's wandering, looking for, and he shows up at the local Chabad house, and he is taken in there. Yes, Howard, I can see your.
Presumably, Darkar is the Shoresh is Derech, so it's his way, on his way. It's as simple as that.
He's on his way, but he doesn't know where he's on his way to. That's the point.
He's on his way.
And Steinsaltz uses the word wandered. He wandered north, implying that this is not a journey which has got a particular, at this point, a particular path that he knows he's going on. Yeah, he's on his way. He doesn't know where he's going to. He's wondering. How many times do we read about this? You know, they're looking for their path in life, and that's what he was doing. He was looking for his path. He showed up at Michah's Chabad house, and he's about to get to be offered a job. But we've run out of time.
Johnny, I have to go. I have a medical appointment.
Okay, we're all going, Leon. So thank you. We've run out of time. So we'll leave it here. We've set the scene of a lawless society, in as much as a religiously lawless society, at least. Every man was doing that which was right in his eyes when he shouldn't have been, because Moshe Rabbeinu has told us very clearly that that's not what we should do. Money is being expended with no expense spared. In the service, in my opinion, in the service of God, with a capital G, but in a perverse and crooked way. And here we have a young man on his journey in life, and he's about to make a massive error in his life, aided by the misguided Michah, and from there it will degenerate into lots of even worse things. Paul wants to say something. Yes, Paul.
I'd like to point out that the next couple of verses goes back to being a nutter.
Ah, okay, that's good. That's good. Verse 9 describes, where's it described as a nar, Paul?
It says,
oh, there we are, verse 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good. And verse 12, you're right. Okay, that's interesting. So we'll have to think about some good explanations for that for next week. Yeah, okay. I'm glad you mentioned that right at the end. So that gives me a time to sort of try and find something interesting to say on that. Anybody got any interesting comments to say before we call it a day today? Jeffrey.
Could it be that the mother who gave the money was thinking that maybe she'll set up a yeshiva or a shul? I know they didn't have shuls in those days, but could that not be interpreted that she is setting up a Bet Knesset?
Yeah, I think she was. I think that she had all the correct intentions, but the problem was that in the same way as our cousin did not get it, that breaking Shabbos to celebrate Purim makes no sense, she didn't get that putting an idol in this yeshiva or shul of hers didn't make any sense. So yeah, I think that her intentions were honorable. At least to start with, her intentions were honorable. Whether I think Michah sort of goes, you'll see next week, Michah goes a bit further. But I think you're right. I think she had honorable intentions, but the level of religiosity, the level of knowledge, the level of keeping of the Ten Commandments was so poor at that time that she, despite her honorable intentions, messed it all up. So I agree with that. I agree with that. Yes, Nachum, unmute yourself, Nachum.
It was interesting to see that every time it discusses this young man, that they never tell you his name.
And I was reading a little bit of the commentary here, and apparently he was a bad Levite. He was a Levite of disrepute. He was not a person that the Levites were proud of. And so he really wasn't accepted within his own Levite community. And that's why he was sojourning everywhere, because look at him, we don't even know his name.
You're right.
I don't see it.
We'll see his name later on, and his name later on comes as a big shock. So I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to spoil it for you. But you're right. You're right. I'm sure you're right, and I'm sure the Mephoshim are right.
It also says that he's referred sometimes as a lad. He was the grandson.
No, you're not allowed to say. No, you're not allowed to say. That's going to spoil the story. Okay. This is the beauty of Zoom. I can mute him when he's about to let the cat out of the bag. He's not going to tell us who he is yet. But Nachum is right that he was obviously a Levi who was not doing what he should be doing. If he was a Levi working as a Levi, he should have been in Shiloh at the Mishkan, but he wasn't. He was wandering around Beit Lechem and then off to Har Ephraim because he didn't have a proper job, if you like, as a Levi. We will find out who he was in a couple of weeks' time. Okay, any other comments?
Was that the original Mike's place?
Could be, Mike. Maybe that's where he got the name. I don't know whether that was a house of worship or a house of sin. I've never been. But I have been, but only once.
Thank you.
Okay, Shabbat Tov, everybody.
Shabbat. Thank you.
Shabbat Tov.
Bye.
Bye.
Didn't have an art scroll. No, Paul says
Johnny,
an art scroll. That's the problem.
Johnny, how did they give you food in Kfar Bloom? What was the method?
So there's a dining room, and each family group had their own table, which was distanced from the next table. The food was buffet. People had to go table at a time to the buffet, and you had to have a mask when you approached the buffet. The staff served the food for you. You didn't touch any of the food yourself. They served it onto your plate. You told them what you wanted. They served it onto your plate, and then you took it back to your table. It was very good. I was very impressed. They kept pretty good social distancing, and it was not very intrusive. It was very good. I was impressed with it.
Good, thank you very much.
Because we were there a few times, but there were many people there.
Yeah, we were afraid to go.
It wasn't packed. My son-in-law, who knows about these things because he's a travel agent, reckoned it was about 20% occupancy. But there was plenty room to social distance. Each table was well spaced from the next, and the approach to the buffet was managed very nicely.
And was the bedroom disinfected?
I didn't ask them, but I'm assuming it was.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Was there music in the evening?
There was music in the evening in the bar. I didn't avail myself of it. We went out walking along the River Jordan instead.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Shavua Tov,
okay, Johnny.
everyone.
Thank you. See you later.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Where's Vivian? Vivian, don't go yet. Vivian.
Yeah.
Vivian, I hope you're going to go and learn up your Shakespeare, please.
What do you mean? I haven't been sleeping even.
Good. If you don't get 5 out of 5 on the Shakespeare round, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, well, be prepared.
Look, the computer is clean.
Anyway,
Yeah,
thanks for the share.
Your computer.
And I love Buddy Holly. I'm so pleased you chose him.
Oh, that was for Michael Leaf, but I'm hoping to catch him out.
Lovely. Anyway, thanks for the share. Shavua Tov.
Bye.
Thank you, Johnny.
Everyone.
See you later. Thank you.